everyone, and welcome to the last Plan With Me video of this year. I can't believe we are here already. But today we'll set up the December layout, and this time I was really inspired by snowy landscapes, evergreens, and we are keeping everything pretty calm and neutral. But let's get started right away from the cover spread, which I'm so excited about. We are creating this snowy landscape painting using a tracing paper, which will give us this almost two-layered look. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start everything from the background painting. I've been in a watercolor kick lately, probably because of my new watercolor palette, and I also think that watercolors are probably one of the fastest ways to add paintings to your journals. So since many of us might feel a little bit stressed out or busy during this time of the year, creating some quick watercolor paintings might feel like a good idea. Anyway, after using some washi tape to glue this piece of watercolor paper to my painting board, I started to add a few pencil guidelines that will help us visualize the landscape a little bit before we get started. I didn't spend too much time on this step, so all we are really gonna focus on here are the mountains, and maybe you can add some indication for the sizes of the trees in different parts of the paper. And lastly, I also sketched out the cottage in the picture, because I think this is the one part that requires a little bit more detail. But now that we have these few pencil lines in place, we're taking out the watercolors and starting by painting the sky first. I used a wet on wet technique here, which will help to blend all the colors very seamlessly together. So I added a clear layer of water here first before going in with the paints. I think I actually added a little bit too much water here, but luckily it didn't cause me any problems this time. And this is also where you want to use those mountain guidelines we just drew to make sure that the water stays in the sky part and doesn't overlap with the mountains. I wanted to use some very grayish tones here with a hint of green in there. I don't know if it's that noticeable in the video, but I did mix a pretty good amount of olive green with the other shades throughout this whole painting. But this scenery would also work perfectly with some brighter blue tones as well. I'll leave the color names I'm mixing to the screen, but always remember that you'll be able to get a very similar tone by mixing other colors as well, so it doesn't matter if you don't own these exact colors I'm using. However, I wanted to leave some variation and texture here at the sky, and I also wanted the top part to be a little bit darker and then do this gradient effect towards the lower part of the sky. Since we're adding the tracing paper on top of this painting, the main thing I wanted to achieve was to create quite a bit of contrast between the light and dark tones, because I think that will help all the different details and colors show up even through the paper layer. Anyway, now we're letting the sky completely dry, and then we'll add some white stars on top of it using a white gouache paint. If you don't own a white paint, a white pen would also work perfectly fine, but my favorite way to add white stars is to use this brush method, where you dip a small brush into the paint and then hit it with something on top of the area you want to add the stars to. But that's all we're gonna do for the sky, and next we'll move on to the mountains and evergreens. I think especially this mountain part can look a little bit confusing, and there really is no right way to do this. I just tried to look through some pictures of snowy mountains, and what I found was that they often have these darker spots, and then the shadowy parts have pretty sharp angles. So I was just trying to replicate what I saw in the pictures in general. I didn't have any one reference picture here, but making some general observations will always help you in the right direction. The mountains will also blend a lot more to the background after we add the trees and other details to this picture, so even if they don't look exactly perfect at this stage, it's gonna get better, I promise. But after you're somewhat happy with the mountains, we can start working on the evergreens. I chose a pretty dark color for these, basically almost black with just a hint of blue or green in there, so that they really stand out from the rest of the scenery. And then we'll just start from some small trees in the distance and gradually make our way forward while making the trees larger. I think the easiest way to paint an evergreen is to think about a triangle shape, and then using a small detailing brush you can add these small branches to the sides of the trees and then just make it slightly wider while you're going down. I'll paint a few of them here slower so you get a better idea of the process, and then we'll speed up the rest to save some time. At some point I felt like it would be a good idea to paint the cottage, and I wanted this to add a slightly warmer accent to the rest of the picture, so I chose some pretty warm brown tones here, and again added the details with this small brush. But after we've added a few more evergreens here and there, I once again took out the white gouache paint and used it to add snow to the evergreens. I think this always makes the trees look much more detailed, and it also adds this extra wintry aesthetic. And after this step, we're done with the first painting. You could definitely leave the painting like this and glue it to your journal, but I wanted to try out something a little bit different with this tracing or vellum paper. So this will smooth out and almost blur some of the colors and details from the first layer, and then I used this to add a few bigger, darker evergreens here at the front of the painting. So I really like how painting on this paper adds some dimension to this picture, and I feel like this just adds something a little bit more interesting to this otherwise very simple winter scenery. These trees were a little bit big to paint only with this small brush, so I added a first layer here with a slightly bigger brush and then went over everything with this smaller detailing brush. But now that we have everything ready here, we just need to trim these paintings to the correct size and glue these two papers together. The glue marks showed through the tracing paper a little bit more than I thought, so that's something you might want to keep in mind. However, after we have attached everything, I did add these pieces of white lace paper to the corners because the top part was looking a little bit too lonely for my liking, and then we'll finish off this whole page by writing a December title. All in all, I think the tracing paper really suits this wintry style by adding that frosty look to the initial painting. And now the trees at the front really stand out too. Also, while I finish the page here, I quickly want to mention that this theme will be available as a digital version, and you can either get it from my shop or my Patreon. I actually updated my Patreon benefits a little bit last month, so now you'll also get a matching digital journaling kit, which is part of the lowest $2 tier. So if you haven't checked out my Patreon page yet, the link to that will be in the description. There's also a new winter collection coming next week over on my shop, as well as a bigger Black Friday sale. So if that's something you'd be interested in, definitely keep an eye out for that. Okay, but that's enough advertising, and now let's flip over and start setting up the monthly calendar page. This was one of those spreads for me where my initial idea didn't really work, so you'll see how I changed the course here a few times. I really wanted to use these two papers this month. The grayish green color is one that I printed out on a white sticker paper, and then I have this brown craft sticker paper, but any green or brown papers would work here. So I first wanted to just add this green edge to the page and then add a white paper on top of it. I was also gonna make this Dutch door page here in the middle and continue the green on the other side. However, I thought that the green edge looked a little bit weird in the end and it didn't really have as much impact as I wanted here. So instead, I ended up covering pretty much the whole first page here with the green paper, and we'll draw the monthly calendar on top of this. I usually place all the boxes and titles in the middle of the page, but this month I wanted to change things up a little bit and try placing some of the items more on one edge of the page. I'm not really a fan of using a white pen throughout the month for writing this stuff in my journal, because I feel like it often ends up looking a little bit messy, and it's also a little bit difficult to write with the white pen. So using colorful papers that are still light enough for black pen to show up from it might be a lot easier to deal with. But after this very simple and minimalistic calendar was done, I decided to add one of these lace paper thingies to the upper corner again, and then we can start adding some decorations to the right side. So as my plans here changed a little bit, I decided to also get rid of the Dutch door and try out something with this tracing paper once again. So I added this half page width piece and glued this folded edge to the notebook, so we're still able to flip this open kind of like an envelope. I don't know if this whole idea worked as well as I had hoped. To be honest, I didn't really know what I was doing here, but anyway, what I decided to do was just paint some wintry trees and plants under the tracing paper with watercolors again. While painting, I tried to switch the tones I was using a little bit to get some variation. So I was kind of going between a brighter olive green, then mixing a little bit more blue to it. And I also wanted to add a hint of these warmer brown tones. I also ended up adding some dusty red berries here, and even though this idea maybe as a whole didn't turn out as well as I had hoped, I still liked all these individual elements and think they would be perfect to add to many different winter or Christmas themes. But after the decorations here were done, you can now flip the tracing paper over and see the effect it adds here. So again, it kind of hides the decorations a little bit and adds this blurry, frosty look. But I did want to add a little bit to the envelope effect by adding this fake wax seal to the center of the page. So I painted some shadows to the brown craft paper with watercolors, but it was actually quite difficult to paint on this paper. So after all, I didn't end up coloring this that much. However, now the decorations on this spread are completely done, and as a last step, I added these two titles here on the left side. So I'll use this small space here to first list some Christmas gift ideas. I also have some souvenirs I need to get because I will be traveling to Finland for the holidays to see my family. I live in Japan, so I don't get to go there that often, so it's always very exciting when I can travel back there. But anyway, since I don't think I'll need the whole page for the presents or gifts, I just left this lower part here for any random notes I might have throughout the month, which is always a great section to add as a filler if you have run out of other ideas. Anyway, even though this spread didn't maybe end up quite as I wanted, it was still definitely good enough for me, and we can finally move on to some more planning and reflection stuff. I will have a little bit different weekly layout this month, which we will do last in this video. So here I really wanted to squeeze both the monthly planning section for December and a monthly reflection with also some yearly reflection questions on this same space here. So again, I started here by creating this Dutch door in the middle of the page, which will give us enough space for everything we want to add here. And then we'll use the top and bottom to add some decorations that are seen on both of these pages. My idea for these decorations was to leave some white silhouette illustrations against a dark background. I was very inspired by many Christmas card decorations I saw online, and it took me a while to decide how to approach this in the journal. I knew that using watercolors for the background would probably not work on the notebook paper, and it would maybe make the paper wrinkle a little bit too much. So eventually I decided to use gouache paints instead. But first I sketched out all the white decorations that we will then go around with the darker background color. And I wanted here to be some tree branches and some deer silhouettes to add that wintry Christmas appearance. Another way to do this whole thing would be to use watercolor paper and then glue the whole thing in your notebook. But to be honest, my journal was already getting so thick that I decided to let that idea go. Filming the last monthly video in the journal is always quite a struggle because of how thick my bullet journal already is, but at the same time, it's so satisfying to see all the paintings and decorations from all the past months, which makes it worth the extra struggle to keep the pages open. Anyway, I used these 3 colors for the background because I didn't really know if I wanted there to be some variation or if it would look better to keep the colors more solid. So I started here with a little bit more water with the paints, which creates a little bit more sheer appearance. This didn't look that bad when the paints were still wet, but when they started to dry down, I felt like this definitely looked a little bit messy. So you'll see how I changed the approach a little bit when we moved to the lower part of the painting. And eventually, I also added a second layer of paint to this top part here. But otherwise, I was just trying to create these tree shapes with some leaves at the top. I also tried my best to almost continue the trees from the bottom edge to the top part here, but I'm not sure if it worked that well with all this space in between these. But after all, I think removing the washi tapes and adding the rest of the details on this spread definitely made me like these decorations a little bit more. I also think that this would be a great idea to try out for some Christmas cards or maybe different style decoration where there wouldn't be a space here in the middle. For some reason, I wasn't super happy about how this all turned out, to be honest. I felt like the color and style didn't exactly match with the previous pages, and I was feeling a little bit like my theme was falling apart at this stage. But you know, that sometimes happens, it's totally okay, and all we can do is just make the most out of it. But anyway, now that the decorations here are done, we can finally move on to the planning section. So here we will start by making these brown paper titles. As I mentioned, I'll spend most of December in Finland, so I won't really be needing planning stuff that much in my journal this month. However, there are still many things I need to get done before leaving, so I really like to use these monthly focus boxes to organize my thoughts a little bit and write down the most important things that I need to get done. Then I used the lower part of the first page to write this "Get More Disciplined" mission title. Also, now looking back at this footage, I realized that I wrote discipline wrong. I think there should be an S in there. But anyhow, I feel like self-discipline is something that I constantly struggle with and try to find ways to improve. I think especially those of you who work for yourself, maybe as a freelancer or if you're a university student, you'll probably relate to this feeling. So I really like to use my bullet journal to brainstorm and reflect about stuff like this, and it might be very helpful to have this one section that you can also look back to and refer later when you're maybe having a not so productive moment. I think I might emphasize this a little bit more in the upcoming themes because the new year is coming and it always feels like a very good time to get our stuff together and make some new habits. Anyway, we definitely talked way too much about that, so what I did for this next page is just a simple travel diary section. I hope this will be enough room for me, but if it's not, I can always continue it after the weekly pages as well. But that's that for the planning section, and now let's flip over to the other side, which will hopefully help us do some monthly and yearly reflection. I always like to start these pages with an overall "How was December?" question because it's a very open-ended question and allows you to process exactly what's in your mind at the moment. I feel these pages in the very end of the month, so it works as a review and also maybe as a way to bring up some things that you might want to work on moving forward. But then under this, I wrote this "How did I change in 2022?" question, and we're gonna divide this into the good and the bad. I think being very honest with yourself, especially when it's in the comfort of your own personal journal, is very important for growth. Of course, we should always be kind to ourselves, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be honest about certain things. If there's something that you truly don't feel good about, or if something just kinda took a wrong turn last year. We all have those moments, and whatever it might be, I encourage you to take a moment to maybe reflect on it with kindness, please, and it might even turn out to be the first step into making a change for the better from now. But anyway, in the next page, we have best achievements of 2022, which I also think is very important to remind yourself about, especially if there was something in the beginning part of the year. You should definitely revisit that achievement and feel proud of yourself. And then lastly, I left some room here to write about what's next, which will probably serve as the first brainstorming session for the next year's goals. So there we have it. I really hope these questions gave you some ideas, and now we still have the weekly section to set up, so let's do that very quickly. I thought we could try to tie everything together here a little bit in terms of the decorations, so I decided to go with these same branches, and we'll also paint some evergreens at the bottom of the page. Again, I personally really like to have some variation in these leaf colors. I think it just makes them look a little bit more interesting. So to achieve that, you can switch the amount of water you're using with the paints, and I also had a few different tones that I was switching between. I left some empty room here in the middle that will be for our title. I didn't want this page to turn out super complicated or anything, so these few watercolor elements are all we're gonna do in terms of the decorations. I decided to title this page December Tasks because calling it a weekly layout sounded a little bit weird. So eventually I decided to separate my task lists into these 3 different categories, which are things I need to do before going. Then there are a few things I need to remember to do in Finland as well, like post a few videos and stuff like that. And then there are also a few things after I come back. I think I'll mainly need this section before leaving for Finland because I probably won't be thinking about work stuff much when I'm there. So that's why this section will be more of a master task list for me, I guess. Not so much a daily planning section this month. Then on the second page, I just did a very quick weekly planner for the first 2 weeks. So here I can still see all the dates and mark down something if I feel like I need it. And honestly, I don't think I'll even need this for the last 2 weeks in December, but there's still room in my journal, so I can always just set up a quick weekly page if I need it. I'll definitely change this section up for the digital version, so you will get a little bit more traditional weekly layout if you decide to purchase the theme. But anyway, that finally finishes up the December theme. I think the cover was definitely my favorite this month, and otherwise it was one of those layouts for me that gave me some trouble. But I still really hope you got some new ideas from it nevertheless. We'll still meet again before the holidays and the new year. I have quite a few videos planned for next month, and of course the new yearly setup video is also coming up very soon, so I hope you're as excited for all of that as I am. Anyway, if that was your first time around here and you want to stay tuned for more, definitely consider subscribing. And I guess that's it for this time. Thank you so much for another amazing year of bullet journaling. Your support truly means everything to me. I hope you'll have an amazing day or night and a beautiful upcoming holiday season. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!